Okay, so week 9 was a pretty big week content-wise. Both your primary source analysis and your discussion were about the major religions and how they develop, why they develop, and how they suddenly also get these interesting little offshoots of them, the syncretic ones. It's particularly um, significant because this is both classical and post-classical in both of these. And basically, what we're seeing now is a building of much larger empires encompassing many more people. And as these societies become more complex, as they're taking on more issues, they actually begin to use religion as a mechanism for bringing more diverse peoples together into one unit. And that's one of the big things about why transcendent religions evolve the way they do. Up until the classical era, almost all societies, with perhaps the exception of Judaism, were polytheistic. I refer to this as a superhero god concept where you have multiple gods, each with different aspects or elements, all of them behaving in many respects like humans. And this was partly because this was the way humans thought about anything beyond themselves, was as themselves, anthropomorphizing pretty much everything, including their religions. But as we move into the classical era and there is an actual growth in knowledge and a growth in scientific experiment, technology, things like that. As they begin to figure out more things about the way the world works, the more powerful the deities have to be. They must transcend the abilities of the human mind, which is a big reason why we talk about this as the period of transcendent religions and philosophies, things that are outside of the ability of humans to understand. So that's a big part of where this is going to start. All right, so I'm just going to go through this reasonably quickly, talk you through what I've got here. You may review this as you wish. I'll attach the PowerPoint to the wrap up as well. All right, so as I just said, belief systems in which the deity or consciousness is unknowable or omnipotent, beyond human understanding or reason. Faith becomes a key component, whether it's a philosophy, whether it's a religion. The idea that there is something bigger and greater out there that we can't understand is a necessary component of the concept of transcendent religions. And again, that whole idea that as things become more known, as they begin to understand and correlate um, natural events to specific things to begin to understand, again, the science behind things, the more complex their deities and belief systems have to become. All right, so of course, the big ones Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism. I'm starting on the eastern side, of course. These are all ones that emerge in this period. Confucius, of course, actually lived during the ancient age, but by the time we get to the classical era of the Han dynasty and afterwards, Confucianism has basically permeated Chinese society. At the same time, Buddhism has been moving in by way of India. Taoism, another one that existed there for a very long time, also becomes part of this. And interestingly, through much of the post-classical period, these three religions, or these three philosophies, concepts, in China all work together. They actually kind of reinforce each other, which is pretty neat. Hinduism and Buddhism, of course, are both Indian. Buddhism starts in India during the classical age. Um, it was basically built off of Hinduism in much the same way that Islam and Christianity are built off of Judaism. They share some core components. There's just some changing in the interpretation in the case of Hinduism to Buddhism in the case of how enlightenment can come. With Hinduism, you have to go through the recycling of the soul through the bodies multiple times, hundreds of thousands of years. Whereas with Buddhism, Buddha believed that you could actually achieve enlightenment, the elevation of the consciousness during a specific lifetime. So that's the big difference between those two. But foundationally, as you know from hopefully reading your textbooks, Buddha himself was Hindu. So this is in much the same way that Christ was Jewish. This all comes from that. All right, so if you want a little summation, there's your summation of what the particular philosophies entail. Transcendent religions in the classical age, Judaism to Christianity to Islam, and Zoroastrianism. And these four are all effectively related. We know the direct connection between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They're all of the book, as it were. Um, the book in this case being, well, it's actually several different books, but they all share the same construct, the Old Testament and the Torah to Judaism, the New Testament and the Old Testament in Christianity. And then with Islam, it's the Quran, but also they look upon the Bible, the New and the Old Testament, and the Torah as also sacred writings because they see Allah as being the same God that the Jews believed in and that the Christians believed in. So, one continuation. Where it's interesting, of course, is how you bring Zoroastrianism into it, because, of course, that's a Persian religion, and it is from Zoroastrianism that most theologians and religious scholars believe Judaism took its idea of duality, a duality between God and Satan that goes on, or Yahweh and Satan in Judaism, but then in Christianity, God and Satan. This idea that there is a bad God out there that's looking to subvert people to the bad side, the dark side. Zoroastrianism created literally about the same time Judaism did. The two were amongst peoples who lived in the same area, so obviously there was some overlap. And thus, this is that whole idea also of how they influence the duality. The other thing in all three of these, while we talk in Buddhism uh, and Hinduism, obviously about enlightenment, attaining that super consciousness, joining with the universe as a whole construct. In Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Zoroastrianism is the idea of heaven. There's an afterlife that your soul will experience. These are all, again, part of that transcendence. You're transcending to a higher plane. All right. Um, where they become significant in the creation of classical and post-classical societies, of course, is in the creation of theocracy. Um, this whole idea that there is a state-supported, state-controlled, state-protected religion. If we all pretty much know Christianity best through, as it's the base level for most of our culture. But if you look at it, we start talking about it with the persecution of the Christians in the basically 1 and 200s in Rome, because there are numerous other state-sponsored religions, obviously, the Roman pantheon itself. But then by the 300s, certainly by 325, with Constantine, whose mother was Christian, heavily, well, he came to Christianity through a dream that he had one night prior to a big battle, and this was a battle for control of the empire. Your textbooks, again, will tell you most of this. In the dream, he saw a bright shining cross in the sky, and that basically told him that he would win the battle, but only if he converted to Christianity. Now, he doesn't convert until his deathbed. But what he does do is from the time he wins that battle and solidifies his control of the empire, he elevates Christianity to become one of the state-supported religions, not the state-supported religion. He wasn't ready to go that far yet, but he does make it one of them. And as I said, he does himself convert on his deathbed. It's another 100 years or so before it actually becomes the only state-supported religion in the Roman Empire. By that time, of course, it is primarily in the eastern part of the empire, because the shift has become even stronger in that direction. It's also part of why when we speak of the organization of the Catholic and the Greek Orthodox churches, you have in the Greek Orthodox Church the patriarchs, and in the Western Roman Catholic Church you have the Pope. At one time, historically, through this period when the empire is still one empire, even though the West is fracturing, all of these guys, the Pope was equal to all the other patriarchs. But then with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, The Pope basically sets out kind of on his own, becomes pretty much the figurehead politically and religiously for all of Western Europe. And that's a big part of how he retains his power and control, and part of why, with the emergence starting in around the 600s and 700s of new monarchies scattered throughout Western Europe. They look to the papacy for support, for validation of the right of whatever king it is to rule, but at the same time, the Pope begins to look to those kings as people he can use, particularly as he is trying to define Western Christianity, quite often in opposition to Eastern Christianity, which is a big part of why we get to that whole construct of schisms coming next. But for right now, the big thing is this development of theocracy, that it certainly becomes the role politically of whoever's in power to reinforce and support the state-sponsored religion, but in return, that religion um, justifies the rule of that leader. So it's a reciprocal relationship. In order for it to work, though, everybody has to believe the same thing throughout the new empire and the emerging kingdoms, which is a big part of why we refer to it as theocracy. Religion controlling the government, in this case, quite often reciprocal relationships. But this sort of thing leads to schisms. And this is the part that I found most interesting in your papers, is very few of you gave me specific examples of schisms. You mentioned either what they were or that they existed. A lot of you went into political schisms. Now, we're talking about religious schisms here, and this is where religions split, right? Confucianism, after Confucius's death himself, his religion split into two different schools. It is from one of those under Xunzi that you get to the legalistic school, which actually controlled a number of large states in China towards the end of the Warring States period. In Buddhism, you get the Chinese interpretation of Buddhism, which then morphs into yet another one. So you get Theravada and Mahayana, one being more devotional than the other. And by devotional, we mean looking to the Buddha as a god as opposed to just a philosophy here. In Hinduism, you get the emergence of Jainism, which was a very, what we would define as conservative interpretation of Hinduism. The idea in Jainism that if you hurt anything at all, even accidentally stepping on a bug on the ground, then you are weighting down your karma with this so that you can't transcend. So Jainism effectively is absolutely no harm to anybody. The way to get there is by having as little weight on you as possible at all. And self-sacrifice is a function of being able to earn points in that situation or to shake off some of the bad things that you've done, right? And then, of course, in our major classical religions, lots of schisms. In Judaism, very fraught with schisms, certainly at the time that Christ was born. Various groups of Jewish peoples in Palestine itself, and what was then Israel, with different interpretations of what they were supposed to be doing. Christianity, of course, we'll see the very first schism at starting at the Council of Nicaea, called again under Constantine, in an attempt to solidify the orthodoxy of Roman Catholicism. A number of different groups at that point in time, once at the end of the council, which the council goes on for about 10 years. We like to think this is, no, this is not just a meeting. This is a long term that they are hammering out what they're going to believe in terms of the orthodoxy of Christianity, something that today we take for granted because now we've evolved from effectively the decision makers, as it were, at that point in the 300s. At that point, the whole idea of the Trinitarian view, the idea that God the Father and the Son are effectively all one entity, and they're all effectively divine, except for that period of time in which Christ was human. This is significant because there are a lot of debates in the early church about what the nature of Christ was. This is where some of these groups, like the Manichaeans, the Monophysites, etc., come from. The Nestorians, this is all a debate about the nature of Jesus. How much was he human versus how much was he divine? Um, Again, not something we think about a lot today, but we should, because this is really kind of an interesting question when you think about it, and certainly was one that they thought about. But the end of the Council of Nicaea, when all of these other groups were told, nope, you're wrong, this is the doctrine we're going to go with, a lot of them left. And by that I mean they left the empire, not just the Western Roman Empire, but also the Eastern Roman Empire. So many of them move into Syria. Larger numbers of them drift into India and even as far as China, which is why when Chinese mission or when Western missionaries start showing up in China in the um, early 1000s, they're finding Christians there, but to them, these are heretical Christians. These are Christians who didn't accept the decision of the church, and therefore they are worse than the non converted Chinese. The other bigger schism in Christianity, of course, is the division between the Western Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And this comes to fruition effectively, I mean, it starts in the 500s, but it literally comes to fruition in the 900s with the whole issue over iconography. Um, so yeah, something that you should be familiar with. This is the big break there. And there are other breaks over time, particularly in the Western view. Islam, of course, a number of different groups. Very few of you mentioned the Sunnis and the Shias, which is the most well-known one, but there are ones even before that. Um, the Kharijites who literally leave the body or the followers of Islam to establish their own rule, even before Ali's assassinated. Which leads to the Sunni Shia split. And then there are others that follow even after that. The Shia particularly have large numbers of different variations. They're the Niners, the Twelvers. These are followers of specific beliefs about who should have been the caliph, because again, with the Shia, the belief is that only someone who was of blood relationship to Muhammad could actually lead the faith. Zoroastrianism, there are splits in it, particularly the Parsis, who were Zoroastrians who fled Persia after the wake of the um, Muslim takeover of Persia because of the persecution. They too, very different, or over the course of time, become very different from the Zoroastrians who remain in Persia. And there are still, just so we're clear, Zoroastrians who practice today. All right, so this then brings us, after the discussion of schisms, to this idea of syncretic religions. Syncretism, literally, the bringing together of two different religions or cultures to create a new third one. Syncretic religions particularly began to evolve as different peoples are assimilated into empires that have state-sponsored, state-supported, state-reinforced religions, right? All right. So one of the first best examples of syncretism, the way that the Romans adopted the Greek gods. And this, I love this chart. This is your Greek name for the god which came first. The Romans would adopt it and give it their own name, but effectively it's the same god. This was not a new thing. This is just one of the best examples of how it works. It also, of course, lays the foundation for the emergence later of monotheism, right? In Christianity, some of the syncretic religions that emerged, Gnosticism, which actually you can view that as Christian or Jewish, either way. This particular quote that I have came from the Jewish Virtual Library, but the construct is the same, that there are books or knowledge that can be gained from the divine itself, that it's not just what's written in the accepted texts like the Torah or the Bible. In fact, many Gnostics believe that there are books of the Bible that didn't make it into the final Bible version, in which case, I mean, they're right, obviously. There were like 300 different books that in the wake of the Council of Nicaea, the learned men sat down to determine which books should be in the Bible. These guys, Gnostics, believe that some of those other books actually hold very significant information. The Cathars are a fascinating group. I asked a number of you about those in the course of discussions, didn't get many answers on them. The Cathars were a group of Christians that evolved in effectively France. I was going to say it France. You know, there was some question at that point in time over how much control the actual French monarch had over that section of land. The Cathars prospered there for a number of generations. They effectively adopt a lot of their ideas from, again, Christian Gnosticism and Manichaeism. Um, they would ultimately, literally, be destroyed when the French king called a literal crusade against them. Now, to be fair, he was more interested in taking away control of the area from the duke who had it at the time, because that particular duke wouldn't kowtow to him, wouldn't do what he wanted him to do. So he basically used the Cathars and the support from the papacy to go against them in order to um, take physical control of that section of France and bring it under his complete control. It did, though, involve the mass murder of thousands and thousands of people, children included. Um, we're reaching that point in the course, and that's another reason why I bring this up now, and make sure that I put this in here. The other really good examples of syncretic religions evolving from Christianity, principally from Catholicism, come from Native Americans and Africans. This week, week 10, we've been discussing the slave trade. Well, the slave trade introduces numbers and numbers of people to Christianity, people who didn't know anything about it, starting with the Native Americans who were conquered by the Europeans, partly because of being too trusting and assuming that these Europeans who arrive on their shores are like them, but also because of the diseases that run through the Native American population for centuries. We've kind of talked about disease with bubonic plague. Disease will run rampant, killing off a huge chunk of the population. The population that seems to have some sort of natural immunity to it will survive. But then when they start having kids, it'll take several generations for those children to develop the natural immunity as well. And even then, that doesn't happen, greatly. Smallpox was still being suffered by Europeans, even into the time that they arrive in the Western Hemisphere. Children would still get it. It would still be painful. It just wouldn't be quite as deadly and detrimental because they'd had generations and generations of genetics working with it, and developing a certain level of immunity that was passed from mother to child. Native Americans did not have that. Africans would also have similar problems, not so much with the diseases that, all of the diseases that the Europeans carried, but some of them. So anyway, as we go through this, a lot of what the Spanish particularly do, even though the Portuguese will be involved with it as well, and then later the British in North America, what they will do is to attempt to convert the Native Americans and some of the African Americans to Christianity, to their specific form of Christianity. It's significant that we're also entering the period of the Reformation, starting in 1517, where you have numerous different interpretations of Christianity coming out of Western Europe. And every time one of these groups arrives in the Western Hemisphere, it will attempt to convert some group, Native Americans, Africans, whomever it has access to that particular view of Christianity. In order to do this, a lot of the times they adapt a similar method to what the Catholic Church in the West had done in the 300s, 400s, and 500s after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. They would take the religion of the indigenous peoples, particularly deities, and they would associate them with saints in the Catholic canon, with the idea being to say, okay, you like this particular God, these are the powers that God has. Well, we have this saint who can do some of those similar things. So you should start praying to the saint instead, because that will get you into our religion. And then from there, they could work up to the ideas of monotheism, God, Christ, Mary, etc. Um, Many of these syncretic religions are still practiced today, particularly throughout South America and the Caribbean. Examples, again, particularly in South America, Andean Christianity, the Andes being, of course, where the Spanish encountered the Inca, so this is the offshoot of that. Voodoo, Santeria, these are African and Christian syncretic religions based on specific ideas of specific African peoples at the time they arrive in the Western Hemisphere. So, all right. Sufism, a mystical form of Islam, as it were, influenced by Christian, Zoroastrian, Greek philosophical things, ideas um, in effectively the areas being conquered by Muslims. The Yazidis, a Kurdish group, principally in northern Iraq, southeastern Turkey, northern Syria. This particular group adopted a lot of Iranian religious ideas as well as elements of Judaism, Nestorianism, Christianity, and of course, Islam. And there is some influence in there of Zoroastrianism as well. The Sikhs, one of my favorite groups, one of the more interesting, because unlike all these others, the creation of the Sikh syncretic religion was completely intentional. Guru Nanak was trying to reconcile the Islamic leaders of India with the Hindu peoples they were controlling. So effectively, Nanak looked at both religions very closely and chose elements that were similar enough that he could bring them to a common ground. Um, it's a very fascinating religion to look at, particularly in terms of its orthodoxy. You can see literally the Hindu and the Islamic elements in it. As with these other syncretic religions, however, instead of meeting with success and the ability to reconcile these two groups of people, if anything, he divided them even further. The one thing they could agree on, the Muslims and the Hindus, was how much they really, really hated the Sikhs. So, yeah, fascinating group of people that were met with a lack of success wholeheartedly. They do have a pretty large population, though. There's still a large number of Sikhs in India itself, with the second largest number of Sikhs in the world actually being in the United States. A lot of them came here. Zen Buddhism. This is a Japanese interpretation of Buddhism, using specific ideas from Japanese culture and mixing it with Buddhism. Neo-Confucianism itself, a fascinating interpretation of Confucianism that begins to evolve under the Song and then the Tang are going to take it even further. And it really does literally twine all three of the major philosophical ideas in China together into one state-supported idea, eventually state-supported idea, one at the time, but eventually. All right, so why? Syncretic religions, again, make it easier for big empires to incorporate smaller places into them. It makes colonialism much easier, and we're going to be talking a lot more about colonialism because, again, we're entering into the early modern age, the period when the Western Europeans explode upon the rest of the world, as I like to say, and with that, attempt to force them to take on Western attributes. This image, by the way, on the right, the big golden temple, that's the Sikh golden temple in India. It's a beautiful place. And they feed people free meals every day. This is one of the things the Sikhs inherited from both Islam and Hinduism, this idea that you take care of your community. So if you are poor in India, any Sikh temple offers free food as much as it can afford it. The Golden Temple, being the main one, does it daily. Down here is an image of the Virgin Mary, but she has been interpreted through the eyes of an artist who was an Incan or had Incan heritage. And this is because of Pachama, who is the or Pachamama, who is the Earth Mother goddess to the Incans. They wove her and some of their ideas, particularly ideas about the sun and the moon, into the iconography here. So, rebellion. Sometimes syncretic religions come about as a mechanism for rebelling against the control of an empire by refusing to give up your own personal religion or the religion of your forefathers completely. You might take on the mantra of whatever the dominant religion is, but add your own interpretations to it. Again, a lot of this we see with the Cathars, in voodoo, in some of the Native American religions. Um, Again, the ease of converting people or keeping them in it, if you can, as a big empire and you choose to do this, then sometimes it can be done as a mechanism for bringing people into the empire and helping them assimilate. In most cases, though, they're almost holistically met with disdain and repulsion by the people who are the practitioners of what they consider to be the true religions, right? All right. So, speaking of colonization, here you go. Religion and trade. Well, of course, we've already talked consistently about how religion moves with traders. This is a big part of Frankopan's underpinnings in the Silk Roads. It's a big part of what all of your textbooks talk about in terms of the movement of people contact with other peoples as they trade. Sure, religion's a big part of that, but now it's going to blossom even more largely as we get into seaborne trade and extensive seaborne trade. I mean, we've had the Indian Ocean Trade Network, but now we're moving into literally globalization. So all of these religions are going to move into other areas because of that. All right, so big points about religion, these monotheistic or holistic religions, works cited and references, things you can look for. If you have questions, let me know. There's not actually a lot of historiography in this unit simply because this is pretty straightforward. It's the way that religion has spread since the beginning of mankind effectively, but also the ways in which all societies embrace religion insofar as they can, or embrace new religions. They're going to pick and choose the parts they want, especially from the religions they already have. They're going to try as much as they can to try to assimilate all this together. So if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will be moving on to slavery for week 10 and integrating some of that. Again, we're getting closer and closer to the final, so you need to start thinking about historiography through this and also how all these big ideas are going to come together.